Turn off valve HW3 now, or 200 people will die. Those words came from Grace Mitchell, the shy girl who cleaned dishes and hadn't spoken above a whisper in 3 years. But at 11:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, while fire alarms screamed and people rushed to exits, Grace was walking the opposite direction with calm authority. How did the dishwasher know about valve HW3? Why wasn't she running like everyone else? Let's go back to where it all began. At 11:30 a.m. that morning, Grace was washing dishes at Silvergate Convention Hall, headphones playing classical music. The shy girl who stayed invisible had perfected her routine over 3 years. Thump, thump, thump. Grace's hands froze in the dishwater. That rhythmic sound from the basement wasn't supposed to be there. Her father had taught her to listen to mechanical systems every Saturday at the Westfield plant. Grace, baby machines talk to those who listen. Most people only hear the loud stuff, the alarms, the crashes. But the real conversation happens in the quiet sounds. She pulled off her headphones. The shy girl who'd spent 7 years hiding from the world suddenly felt her father's presence stronger than ever. Grace opened her locker and retrieved a battered metal box containing her father's photograph and technical notebook pages yellowed with age and coffee stains from late-night study sessions. Dad always said the quiet ones see what everyone else misses. That's when the fire alarm screamed to life. And that's when Grace Mitchell said the words that would change everything. Turn off valve HW3 now, or 200 people will die. Have you ever felt like you knew something important, but nobody would listen to you? Keep watching to see what happens when quiet wisdom meets loud chaos. The alarm's wail transformed the kitchen into chaos. Servers dropped trays, cooks abandoned stations, and 200 people rushed toward exits. But Grace Mitchell did something different. She looked up instead of running. 4 sprinkler heads were activating in the wrong sequence. The shy girl who'd studied building schematics during lunch breaks counted them northwest first, then southeast, then northeast. All wrong. Grace's mind raced to a childhood conversation with her father. Water systems are like rivers, they follow the path of least resistance. When sprinklers activate in the wrong order, it's never about fire. It's about pressure, finding a way to escape. This isn't a fire. This is a pressure buildup in the hot water main. She'd seen this exact scenario in her father's workplace notebooks, the same system failure that had cost him his life 7 years ago at Westfield. Grace saw the smoke from basement vents, too white and clean for real fire. She saw emergency lighting flickering, indicating electrical issues, not thermal damage. Most importantly, she heard the subtle harmonic frequency that metal pipes make before catastrophic failure. Grace clutched her father's notebook and ran toward the basement. The shy girl who cleaned dishes was about to risk everything to save 200 people. Courage isn't about being fearless, baby girl. It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway. The basement technical room was exactly where Grace expected it to be, 3rd door on the left, just like the Westfield plant layout her father had drawn in his notebook during those long Saturday afternoons when he'd taught her to read architectural blueprints. The room smelled of machine oil and decades of industrial maintenance, a scent that instantly transported Grace back to her father's workshop. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across walls lined with pipes, electrical panels, and monitoring equipment. Marvin Lewis, the 69-year-old maintenance supervisor, was frantically trying to reach Tommy Reyes, the official building technician. His weathered hands shook as he dialed and redialed the same number. "Come on, Tommy, pick up," Marvin muttered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool basement air. "We need you down here now." "Grace, what are you doing down here?" Marvin's eyes widened as he saw her holding Jim Mitchell's old notebook, the leather cover worn smooth from years of handling. "Mr. Lewis, the hot water valve on System 3 is overpressurized. I can hear the harmonic frequency. It's the same sound Dad taught me to recognize when I was 13. Grace opened the notebook to a page filled with detailed diagrams and her father's careful annotations. The shy girl who'd memorized every page during sleepless nights after his death now found herself reliving those precious Saturday lessons. "Listen," Grace said softly, holding up her hand. "Do you hear that high-pitched whine underneath the alarm? That's the sound of metal under stress. The pressure is building toward a catastrophic failure." Marvin stared at the notebook in Grace's hands, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition. The handwriting was unmistakable, the same careful script that had filled work orders and technical reports for 15 years. "This is Jim's work. Your father. He was the best systems engineer I ever worked with at Westfield. We were partners for 3 years before he transferred to the main plant." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You worked with my dad, but you never said anything when I started working here. Honey, you started using your mother's maiden name on your employment application. Grace Chen, not Grace Mitchell. It wasn't until I saw you reading those technical books that I started wondering. And just now, seeing that notebook, there's no mistaking Jim's handwriting. Jim Mitchell saved my life twice. Once when a steam pipe burst in '08, and again when the main boiler started showing stress fractures in '09. He had this gift he could hear what machines were trying to tell him. The shy girl who'd spent years hiding her technical knowledge stepped toward the electrical panel with the precision of someone who'd been taught by a master. Her hands trembled, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of using her father's final gift. "He taught me that every system has a voice." Grace whispered, her fingers tracing the switches. "You just have to know how to listen." The electrical panel was different from the one in her father's notebook, but the principles were the same. Hot water systems, pressure relief, emergency shutoffs, all following the same logical patterns her father had drilled into her during countless weekend lessons. "Grace, are you sure about this?" Marvin's voice carried both concern and hope. "Dad always said that being the shy girl who pays attention is better than being the loud one who guesses." One switch. Just one switch labeled HW3 Emergency Cutoff. And the alarm fell silent. The sudden quiet was deafening. Emergency lighting stopped flashing. The harmonic whine disappeared. 200 people were safe, and Grace Mitchell had just proven that sometimes the most important conversations happen in whispers, not shouts. "Incredible," Marvin breathed, staring at the silent panel. 18 years I've been working in this building, and I never would have thought to check the hot water system first." Grace closed her father's notebook and held it against her chest. He used to say that the shy girl who listens will always outlast the loud one who just talks. The basement door slammed open at 12:15 p.m. with enough force to rattle the pipes. Tommy Reyes burst through his face, flushed with anger and embarrassment, his company polo shirt wrinkled and stained with coffee from his rushed return to the building. Behind him, Sandra Blake, the head kitchen supervisor, wore the expression of someone who'd just witnessed a fundamental disruption to the natural order. Her carefully styled hair was disheveled, her clipboard clutched like a weapon against her chest. "Who gave her permission to touch the alarm system?" Tommy's voice echoed through the basement, bouncing off concrete walls and metal pipes. He'd been transferred from the downtown office just 6 months ago, and the building's older systems still confused him regularly. His engineering degree from the local community college had prepared him for modern digital systems, not the hybrid mechanical-electrical setup that Silvergate had inherited from its 1980s construction. "She's just a dishwasher," Sandra added, her voice sharp with indignation. "A dishwasher who doesn't even have a high school diploma? If something had gone wrong, who would have been responsible? Not her. She doesn't even have insurance liability." Grace's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes fixed on the concrete floor where drops of condensation had formed a small puddle. "I'm sorry. I heard the valve." "You heard the valve?" Tommy stepped closer, his presence looming over the shy girl who'd just solved a problem that had stumped him for months. "Do you know how long it took me to learn this system? 2 years of night classes, hundreds of hours of study, and you just walk in here and start flipping switches like you own the place. Sarindi fido, tu wa tiu." The shy girl who'd inherited her father's genius stood silent while mediocrity screamed about credentials and proper procedures. Her hands shook as she held her father's notebook, the same hands that had just prevented a catastrophic system failure. "This is exactly what's wrong with this generation." Sandra continued, her voice rising with each word. "No respect for authority, no understanding of hierarchy. You think you can just waltz in here and play hero because you watched a YouTube video or something?" Grace's whisper was almost inaudible. "My father taught me about these systems. He worked at Westfield for 15 years. "Your father." Tommy's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "What does your father have to do with anything? This is about professional qualifications, about proper training, about following procedures." Marvin Lewis stood in the corner, his weathered face showing the strain of watching injustice unfold. He'd worked with Jim Mitchell. He knew the truth about Grace's knowledge about the countless hours of training she'd received from one of the best engineers in the state. But in the corporate world, truth often takes a back seat to politics. "Look, I get it," Tommy said, his voice taking on a condescending tone. "You want to help. That's nice. But there are protocols, there are safety procedures, there are legal requirements. You can't just what?" Grace's voice was still quiet, but something had shifted. "Can't just prevent 200 people from being evacuated unnecessarily. Can't just stop a pressure buildup that would have caused thousands of dollars in damage." Tommy's face reddened. "That's not the point. The point is that you're not qualified to make those decisions." What none of them knew was that Nathan Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Ventures, was watching the entire confrontation from the VIP window on the second floor. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes never left Grace's face. He'd been in the building for a crucial meeting with government contractors, a meeting that would determine the fate of a $50 million project. The fire alarm had interrupted their discussion, but Nathan had remained at the window watching how his building's staff handled the crisis. And what he'd seen had changed everything. "She needs to be written up," Sandra declared, her voice final. "This cannot happen again. We have procedures for a reason." Grace nodded silently, accepting the judgment of those who valued certificates over competence, who preferred the comfort of ignorance to the risk of knowledge. The shy girl who'd just saved everyone was about to be punished for her excellence. At 2:00 p.m., Marvin Lewis found Grace sitting alone in the empty hallway outside the employee break room, staring at her father's photograph with tears streaming down her cheeks. The hallway was quiet, except for the distant hum of the building's HVAC system, a sound that most people ignored, but that Grace had learned to interpret like a musical score. Everything was running normally now thanks to her intervention. "Why didn't you tell them about your father?" Marvin asked gently, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd lived through enough workplace injustice to recognize it when he saw it. He sat beside her on the worn linoleum floor, his old joints protesting the movement. In his hands he held a yellowed envelope, that looked like it had been opened and refolded countless times. Because they'll think I'm trying to use his reputation to get ahead, that I'm just some girl who can't make it on her own merit. Grace's voice was thick with emotion. They'll say I'm not really qualified, that I'm just riding on my father's coattails. Grace, look at me. Marvin's voice was firm but kind. Your father was the most qualified engineer I ever worked with. But more than that, he was the most generous teacher I ever met. He didn't just know his job, he made sure everyone around him could do their job better. Marvin opened the envelope carefully, as if handling a sacred relic. Inside was a letter written in Jim Mitchell's familiar handwriting, the same careful script that filled Grace's technical notebook. Your father wrote this to me the week before the accident at Westfield. He said he had a feeling something was wrong with the main pressure system, but management wouldn't listen to him. They said his concerns were unfounded and alarmist. Grace's breath caught in her throat. She'd never heard the full story of what had happened that day. He knew the system was going to fail. He tried to get approval to shut it down for maintenance, but they said it would cost too much money. So he went in alone during his lunch break to try to make emergency repairs. The letter was dated just 5 days before the accident. Grace read her father's words with trembling hands. Marvin, if anything happens to me, please look after Grace. She knows more than she thinks she does. I've been teaching her about these systems since she was 8 years old. She has the gift she can hear what machines are trying to tell us. Don't let anyone convince her that her knowledge isn't valuable just because she doesn't have a piece of paper on the wall. He died trying to save 12 workers who were scheduled to be near that system when it failed. Marvin continued softly. He succeeded. The system held long enough for them to evacuate safely, but not long enough for him to get out. Grace finished the sentence, her voice barely a whisper. Grace, you saved 200 people today. I've watched certified technicians mess up that same electrical panel 6 times in the past year. Tommy himself had to call in an outside contractor last month when he couldn't figure out why the backup generator wasn't working. But you didn't hesitate, didn't guess, didn't need to Google the answer. You knew. The shy girl who'd been carrying her father's legacy in a small metal box finally understood that knowledge isn't about proving yourself to others. It's about acting when action matters most. Your father used to say that the shy girl who listens carefully will outlast the loud one who talks too much. Marvin said, echoing Grace's own words. He was right about that. And he was right about you. Grace looked at the photograph again, seeing her father's proud smile with new eyes. I miss him so much, Mr. Lewis. Every day I wish I could ask him just one more question, learn just one more thing. That's why I've been teaching myself reading technical manuals, studying online courses, trying to keep his knowledge alive. That explains the stack of engineering books in your locker, Marvin said with a knowing smile. I've seen you reading them during breaks. I wondered if you were planning to go back to school. I was too scared. What if I failed? What if I wasn't as smart as he thought I was? He's still teaching you, honey. Through that notebook, through the knowledge he gave you, through the courage he passed down. You proved that today. As they sat in the quiet hallway, Grace realized that her father's greatest gift wasn't the technical knowledge he'd shared, it was the confidence to trust her own intelligence, even when the world told her she was wrong. The email arrived at 3:30 p.m., its subject line stark and official. Personnel action required, immediate attention. Grace opened it with trembling fingers, already knowing what it would contain. Employee Grace Mitchell position, kitchen staff, dishwasher, action shift. Change to night duty, effective tomorrow. Reason, safety protocol violation. Unauthorized access to technical systems, Supervisor Sandra Blake, HR review pending. The break room felt smaller than usual, its fluorescent lights buzzing with the same tired persistence that had marked Grace's 3 years of employment. She sat at the scratched plastic table where she'd eaten countless solitary lunches, reading the same romance novels and technical manuals that had become her escape from the world. Sandra Blake couldn't hide her satisfaction as she entered the break room, her clipboard held like a shield of authority. Finally, she knows her place. "You know, Grace," Sandra said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I really hope you understand that this isn't personal. It's about maintaining order, about following the chain of command. We can't have dishwashers thinking they can just take over whenever they feel like it." Grace nodded silently, her eyes fixed on the email screen. She'd learned long ago that arguing with Sandra was like trying to reason with a storm. It only made things worse. "I mean, what if you'd been wrong? What if you'd caused more damage? Who would have been responsible then?" Sandra's voice rose with each question. "The company has insurance policies, liability issues. We can't just let anyone—" "I understand," Grace interrupted softly. "I won't interfere again." Grace opened her locker and carefully placed her father's notebook back in the metal box. The photograph fell to the floor, and when she picked it up, she saw writing on the back in her father's hand, something she'd never noticed before. "Never let them make you silent, baby girl. Your voice matters especially when they try to tell you it doesn't." "But Dad, I tried," Grace whispered to the empty break room after Sandra had left. "I tried, and look what happened. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should just stick to what I know." She looked around the break room that had been her world for 3 years. The same motivational posters about teamwork and excellence, the same broken coffee machine that never got fixed, the same time clock that had marked her quiet existence. Outside the break room window, she could see the VIP suite where Nathan Caldwell was still in his meeting. Important people making important decisions about important things. The kind of people who had college degrees and business cards and the right to be heard. Not like her. Not like the shy girl who washed dishes and read technical manuals in her spare time. Grace picked up her father's notebook and opened it to a random page. His handwriting looked back at her, filled with diagrams and calculations, and the kind of detailed observations that could only come from someone who truly understood how things worked. "You spent 15 years learning this stuff, Dad. 15 years of night classes and weekend study sessions and promotions earned through pure knowledge. And I learned it from you over Saturday morning pancakes." She closed the notebook and looked at the photo again. Her father's smile seemed different now, not just proud, but confident. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're right, even when everyone else thinks you're wrong. "Maybe that's the problem," Grace said to herself. "Maybe the shy girl who knows she's right is more dangerous than the loud one who's just guessing." The night shift would mean working alone, cleaning up after everyone else had gone home. No more interaction with the daytime staff. No more opportunities to use the knowledge her father had given her. It was exactly what Sandra wanted Grace Mitchell invisible again. The security guard's words were simple, but they carried the weight of destiny. "Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Caldwell would like to see you in the VIP suite." Grace climbed the stairs with trembling hands, her father's notebook clutched against her chest like a shield. She'd never been to the VIP level before. It was a world reserved for important people, people who made decisions that affected hundreds of employees. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt like ascending into another universe. Rich mahogany paneling, soft classical music, and the kind of carpet that whispered of expense and exclusivity. Grace's worn work shoes felt out of place on the plush surface. Nathan Caldwell sat at a polished conference table that probably cost more than Grace made in a year. In front of him was a thick file folder, its contents spread across the surface, like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. "Sit down, Grace Mitchell." Grace perched on the edge of the leather chair, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The shy girl who'd spent 3 years avoiding attention now found herself in the spotlight of the most powerful man in the building. You know my name?" Nathan's smile was enigmatic. "I know more than that. I know you're the daughter of Jim Mitchell, chief engineer at Westfield Manufacturing. I know about your father's 15 years of service, his safety record, his reputation for innovation. And I know about the accident 7 years ago." Grace's breath caught in her throat. "How could you possibly know about that?" "Because Caldwell Ventures owns 60% of Westfield Manufacturing. When our HR department ran a routine background check on all employees last year, your name flagged our system. Jim Mitchell's daughter, working as a dishwasher. I had to know why." Nathan opened the file folder, revealing photographs, technical diagrams, and reports that Grace had never seen before. Her father's official portrait stared back at her from an employee recognition certificate dated just months before his death. "I wasn't watching you, Grace. I was wondering about you. A brilliant engineer's daughter working in a kitchen, there had to be a story there. Your father died trying to fix a system failure that my company's management had ignored for 6 months. He'd submitted 3 separate reports warning about pressure instabilities in the main boiler system. Each time his supervisors marked them as non-urgent and cost-prohibitive." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "He tried to tell them. He tried to make them understand. Jim Mitchell died saving 12 workers who would have been in that section when the system failed. He could have evacuated with everyone else, but he stayed behind to manually override the pressure valves. He bought them enough time to get to safety." The shy girl who'd been carrying her father's legacy in silence suddenly understood that his death hadn't been in vain. It had been the ultimate act of courage. "Today, I watched you do exactly what your father would have done. No panic, no glory-seeking. Just quiet competence when it mattered most." Nathan pulled out a thick folder labeled "Government Contract," classified, and placed it on the table between them. "Do you know what would have happened if that pressure valve had blown during today's government inspection? My company would have lost a $50 million defense contract. The reputation damage alone would have cost me hundreds of jobs." Grace's voice was barely a whisper. $50 million! The inspectors were specifically looking for safety vulnerabilities in our emergency response systems. Today's drill wasn't actually a drill, it was a live test of our crisis management protocols. A catastrophic system failure during their evaluation would have been grounds for immediate contract termination. Nathan pulled out a thick document marked Safety Compliance Requirements and placed it on the table. "The government requires zero tolerance for safety failures in buildings that house classified defense contracts. One major incident, one preventable emergency, and we lose not just this contract, but our security clearance for future bids. You didn't just save 200 people, Grace. You saved my entire company from bankruptcy." Nathan leaned forward, his expression serious. "I've been watching you for 3 years. Not intrusively, but I've been aware. When I learned that Jim Mitchell's daughter was working in our building, I wanted to see what kind of person she'd become. Watching me. I know you spend your lunch breaks reading technical manuals. I know you've memorized the building's electrical schematics. I know you've prevented 3 minor accidents in the past year by quietly fixing problems before they became emergencies." Grace's cheeks burned with embarrassment. I noticed things that seemed wrong. Exactly. You noticed what others missed. You inherited more than your father's knowledge, Grace. You inherited his gift for listening to what machines are trying to tell us. The shy girl who'd been hiding her intelligence for 3 years finally understood that someone had been paying attention all along. Nathan's fingers moved across his keyboard as he spoke. But before I make any official changes, I need to know something. Are you ready to step out of your father's shadow and into your own light? Grace thought of her father's final words on the back of his photograph. Never let them make you silent, baby girl. For 7 years, I've been hiding from what I could become, because I was afraid of failing where he succeeded. But today, I realize that honoring his memory doesn't mean avoiding challenges. It means facing them with the knowledge he gave me. Then let me ask you officially, Grace Mitchell, would you accept the position of Chief Safety Advisor effective immediately? Satriyorn, the shy girl who'd been washing dishes that morning, looked at her father's photograph one more time, then met Nathan's eyes with quiet confidence. I accept, Mr. Caldwell, and I promise you won't regret this decision. Your father wrote in his final report that the real problem with most safety systems isn't the technology. It's that the people running them stop listening to the quiet signals. You never stopped listening. Grace thought of her father's words. The shy girl who pays attention will always outperform the loud one who just talks. I accept, Grace said, her voice steady for the first time all day. Nathan smiled. Good. Because I have a feeling that quiet voice of yours is going to save a lot more lives. 1 year later, Grace Mitchell stood before a room full of engineers and safety inspectors, her father's notebook open on the podium beside her official credentials. This system has 12 critical vulnerability points. The first is the hot water valve on System 3. In the audience, Tommy Reyes took careful notes, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine respect. Sandra Blake, now Assistant Food Safety Manager, worked directly under Grace's supervision and had become one of her strongest advocates. The most important lesson I learned, Grace continued, is that the shy girl who listens carefully will always hear what the loud room misses. From the VIP suite, Nathan Caldwell watched with satisfaction. On Grace's desk, her father's photograph sat next to a framed certificate for Courage in Action, Silvergate Hall's Employee of the Year. Marvin Lewis, now retired, but still visiting regularly, approached Grace after the presentation. Your father would be so proud. You found your voice. Grace smiled, touching the metal box that still held her father's notebook. I realized something, Mr. Lewis. I was never really the shy girl who couldn't speak up. I was just waiting for the right moment to let my actions do the talking. And now I know that sometimes the most important conversations happen not with words, but with the courage to act when action matters most. The shy girl who'd once hidden behind dishwater and headphones had become the voice of safety for hundreds of people. Because in the end, it's not about being the loudest person in the room, it's about being the one who listens closely enough to hear what really matters. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe for more inspiring tales about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that their quiet voice matters too. Because sometimes the most powerful stories begin with the simplest truth, that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, I can help, and changes everything.